Thank you, Mr. President. I knew when I first came to this chamber earlier this year that I'd have some frustrating days, I'd have some disappointing days, and hopefully a few days of elation. Certainly not enough of the latter, but I did not imagine that I would have as disappointing a day as I've had today and yesterday when I started to get hints and little bits and pieces of what this budget proposal would look like. There's clearly a difference in philosophy in this room here tonight, and I know it's pretty much the same down in the House and has been all afternoon and all evening. But, my fellow senators, it's time to put the philosophical differences aside and pay attention to the cold, hard reality of what we're facing here. We know about the myriad problems that we're facing from an economic point of view, from a fiscal point of view, and a slew of other issues that are affecting our fiscal well-being here in the state of Connecticut. We are facing the worst economic circumstances since the Great Depression. In some ways, it's worse. We are looking at a fiscal situation that is as catastrophic as any state in the country, no matter which way you look at it. We also have to recognize that what we do in the legislation that we pass, whether it's a budget bill or just a bill about another issue, wherever there is an initiative, there's always a reaction. We have to be able to anticipate that reaction. If we are, in fact, putting ourselves into what has been very articulately described, but I'll sum it up by saying a downward death spiral, by, in effect, forcing our tax base to leave the state of Connecticut because they simply can't afford it, or simply because they're so intelligent, or they have enough intelligent people around them that the advice they get is to depart from the state of Connecticut as quickly as possible because of, number one, the estate tax, number two, the increase in income taxes going up to 6.5% in this proposal here before us tonight. They leave. I come from a district where I can tell you anecdotally, it's almost impossible to get this statistically, but anecdotally, hundreds if not thousands of families and firms, limited liability corporations, as well as C corporations, have left the state of Connecticut for greener grass in other states and in some cases in foreign countries. It's very important that we realize our tax policy is going to have consequences. All you have to do is look at other states. We all know what the competitive states are in the country today, and you don't have to look too far beyond our shores to understand that there are places like Bermuda. Treat your capital, treat your human beings in a formidable, welcoming fashion. Guess what? You're going to pick up lots and lots of companies, lots of individuals, lots of families, and lots of wealth. That means that you can have a lower tax rate on a bigger tax base, and in fact, a net positive effect on your revenue collections at the end of each period, at the end of each year. It's very, very important to remember that. I fear that if this budget bill passes tonight and goes into law without being vetoed, what's going to happen is that we'll see the last of the significant taxpayers still left in the state of Connecticut. Yes, it's a wonderful state. Yes, it has great beaches. It has Long Island Sound. It has great schools. But they are not going to do this forever. There is a threshold. There is a breaking point for people who pay taxes here. We also have to keep in mind that the tax revenues come from companies. They come from wealthy families. They come from limited liability corporations and, yes, hedge funds. Whether you like any of the above or whether you dislike them, they are the ones who provide the tax revenue stream to the state of Connecticut that allow us to have a state government. When I came up today, a little bit early, I took my time coming up because I wanted some extra time to think about this issue. And I drove by, in my district, I drove by probably 14 or 15 homes where I thought for a few seconds, each house that I went by, if that family leaves the state of Connecticut, it's going to be mildly catastrophic because they are taking with them not only an incredible amount of wealth, they're bringing with them, and that means future revenue to the state of Connecticut. And I'm not just talking about tens of millions of dollars in each case. I'm talking about significantly more than that. But what else, what in addition to that would we be losing? We'd be losing extraordinary philanthropic people who do so much in areas that state government tries to do a good job, oftentimes does do a good job, but doesn't always do a good job. Without them, there are going to be bigger voids to fill. I drove by General Electric Capital Corporation, GECC. I drove by UBS, RBS. I drove by the great helicopter manufacturer, Sikorsky. I drove by Pratt & Whitney, the world's greatest engine aerospace propulsion plant manufacturer in the world. And I thought to myself in each of those drive-bys, what is Connecticut going to look like without them? If you fast forward 10 or 15 years down the road and our tax base is 3/4 or 50% of what it is today, and our tax rates are 3 times or 4 times what they are today, what kind of state do we have? We get into that downward death spiral that Senator Caligiuri was talking about before, and that's not what any of us want. At the expense of the long term, we're doing something for the short term, which I think is myopic at best. We are not, with this budget, approaching the problem intelligently. I know for a fact that all of us want to make the lives of Connecticut citizens better and greater in a variety of different ways. The social programs that we have in the state of Connecticut are in most cases fantastic ones, but it boils down to a question of affordability. And are we doing the right thing today with respect to the long term? I would argue that we're seriously jeopardizing the future of Connecticut. We're borrowing a lot of money. We're going to be borrowing a lot more money in the future if we don't get our act together. Our state budget for 26 years now has been increasing at an average rate of just shy of 7%. The constitutional spending cap, which went into effect, I believe it was 1992, has called for an average spending increase related to CPI or disposable income in Connecticut of no greater than 2.9%. We've broken that by a factor of over 2, and that's inexcusable. We need to get that under control. We're not using any courage. We're not using real courage. We're not using real intelligence like the private sector is to try to get this problem under control. Many of you have run into people who have accused us of spending money like drunken sailors, is their favorite phrase. Well, to a degree, they're right. It's a systematic increase that we are witnessing here over many years, and we're witnessing here as we face another biennial budget of increases to the tune of $800 million over those 2 years, again, while we're facing the worst economic and fiscal circumstances of many, many generations. I'm still wondering where the disconnect is. The vast majority of revenues to the state of Connecticut come from business, and they come from families that do well. And what we need to do is we need to ask ourselves, are we doing the right thing for them? Again, we need to be figuring out ways to foster the private sector, the real productive sector, so that there will be a steady stream of revenues to the state of Connecticut, so that we can, in fact, increase the programs that are in place and maybe even come up with new programs as well. That's the fair and the right thing to do for the people of Connecticut.